All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Rethinking Faith. Hopefully, you're catching us on the YouTube channel, and there's a possibility we may release this as an audio on the podcast as well. Tonight's going to be an interesting night. I am one of your hosts, Mitch Moyer. I'm also joined by James Ballard and Mr. Ray Luke, as you all know by now pretty well. And we've got a pretty controversial and interesting piece of scripture that we want to look at tonight. And what we want to do is we want to look at it separately from the way that the church has normally looked at it from. We're going to specifically head into the book of Hebrews, and we're going to read a passage out of that. And it's very controversial. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have either Ray or James, whichever one of you guys want to pull that up. I'll give you a second to pull that up. And once you pull that up, let me know, and we'll go ahead and take a look at that passage. And these verses are verses that we've heard in the church before. We've heard them several times with a context that comes from, again, a certain way of looking at it. Tonight, we're going to open it up a little bit deeper and a little bit harder and take a look at it with some sources that I think are going to really be instrumental in piquing your curiosity to want to look at this even deeper. So if one of you guys wants to go ahead and grab hold of that passage and take it on, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so as you said, Mitch, this is one of those passages where on the surface level, it does seem to be saying what many people think it's saying, that the Torah has been done away with, or the old covenant has been done away with.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think there are even videos and podcasts still today teaching that idea that, the Jewish people are no longer really part of this unless they choose to become Christians. They're reduced to just kind of an ethnicity now that has equal opportunity to the Bible. And this verse is actually one of those used to make that point. And I think hopefully if we do our jobs well by the end of this, we'll kind of turn that back around and show how that's not exactly the case, how this is actually leveraging rabbinic ideas. And it's a rabbinic understanding given to Jews, hence the book is called Hebrews. So yeah, let's just jump in. Let's just read. I'll read the passage, these texts, and then we'll kind of start off there.
Okay.
All right. So we're looking at Hebrews 8, and I'm going to start halfway through verse 8. It kind of starts midway through verse 8. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will establish a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not like the covenant I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. For they did not continue in my covenant, and so I showed no concern for them, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law into their minds and write them on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And they shall not teach each one to his neighbor, and each one his brother, saying, Know the Lord, because all will know me, from the least of them to the greatest. For I will be merciful towards their iniquities, and I will remember their sins no more. And of course, that's a quote of the prophets. And then it says, in speaking of a new covenant, he makes the first one obsolete, and what is becoming obsolete is growing old and vanishing away. So I guess all of us have heard this verse many times over. We've probably been in many discussions about this verse. How does this normally go when somebody comes to you or brings this verse forward? What is the assumption here?
Well, I mean, looking at what does it seem to be saying when you look at it, you're looking at it through that translation, or you're looking at it through a particular translation. And so a lot of times it's utilized to back either another comment that's being made somewhere else, and again with the doing away of the Torah. And some will say the law, some will say the Torah, and so on and so on. And with it being in what Christians call the New Testament, they're pulling a lot of the foundation out of something they may have heard out of Matthew that was taken out of context by what Jesus said, or something else, another verse that was, put in there to help push that. But basically, it just all comes together, as a foundational piece for saying, okay, we've done away with the Torah.
Definitely, definitely. That's one of the most used objections by, common Christian objections to the Mosaic law being annulled or obsolete. A lot of these terms, a lot of these. Remember, we have to always remember, we've spoken about this, that the New Testament has only been translated by Christian scholars or some scholar that's connected to Christianity in some way. And a lot of times, a lot of biases, biases of Christianity. When I say biases, I mean things that they have taken for granted um, in their theology has crept in either as a side note or as some type of an italics word that's not in the original. And the majority of people don't know this. And because the New Testament has been read in such a slant for so many years, for so many generations, um, you only hear one thing. You only hear that, that the old covenant is done away with, the law is done away with. This is kind of the only thing you kind of, perceive when you're reading this text. But we need to understand what is the historical and religious context. The moment we do that, um, we can do right by the text and by the minds and beliefs of those speakers who wrote down, who jotted down these words. What did they mean by it? What did they believe by it? And this is what we need to get down to.
Let me real quickly, Ray, while you're talking there, let me ask you this. What has been your experience as to how that's impacted the church and the relationship, to the Torah? Because you spent many years within the church, and now you've spent quite a few years outside of it, understanding the impact of the truth of Scripture. The Hebrew Bible, the culture, the time, everything, the importance of the Torah, the importance of God's chosen. What have you seen, or how have you felt of that impact directly into whether it was the church, 400 or 500 years ago, or the church today in its relationship to the Torah?
I mean, this is a very difficult thing, right? Because we're dealing with individuals. Uh, uh, when I speak, sometimes it seems like I'm being very harsh about Christianity. I'm not speaking about individuals, but about the system and how the way the system has been brought down to us. The system is the one that has educated and given faith to the masses, to the individuals. But we need to be careful with the individuals, right? I was once in that same pot, in that same path, and I believe the same things. Um, but this stuff, to answer your question, it goes all the way back to the very beginning, my friend. When I say the beginning, I mean the beginning of Christianity as a Gentile institution, as Roman Catholicism, which is the mother of all other denominations that have sprang forth after her. Um, People like to say, oh, a Protestant. You hear a Protestant speaking, and you ask them, you're Catholic. Oh no, like if Catholics are some type of other type of Christians, and they do not know no type of history, so they think that the Catholics are the worst, but they do not understand Protestants, evangelicals, all these people. They do not understand that the bulk of the things that they believe comes from Catholics. They don't understand that. Catholics have some more what of a system, and they have more ritual, and that's the things that Protestants kind of separated themselves from. But when I'm saying all these type of antinomian type of mindset, against the law and just faith and all these type of statements of faith, these main basic guidelines of theology and doctrine and dogma, comes down from those first councils, 300, 400 years after actually Jesus and the apostles lived. These things began to be believed. Before that, all these things were being debated and discussed, right, amongst other Gentile Christians. And not all of them believed the same things. And at one point, if, for example, talking about the the topic of the divinity of Jesus, at one point, the majority were those who did not believe that he was God in such a literal fashion. It wasn't, they didn't believe this. And it was settled by what? By vote. And then once orthodoxy gained strength, they wiped out all the other views. They wiped them out. So there could be no other type of view. And so that's why Protestantism, all the Protestants, though they have some differences, they still kept the core of the theology. They still kept it. And so, how do I feel? How do I feel about this, man? It takes a lot of education. It takes a lot of education. And for the Christians' point, I think the most important thing they can do is try to be honest with themselves, honest with God, and try to do the homework. And this is kind of what we're trying to do here. Do the homework.
That's very true. And let me turn to James. James, a lot of what Ray said is very practical, very prevalent within the society of the church as we know it. But you got to ask yourself, is there another way to read this? And in asking yourself that, there's got to be sources, or there's got to be something to feed that other way out, because Ray has mentioned several times before about the seed that planted, the seeds that have planted the thoughts that are out there today that go through, whether it's seminary, Bible colleges, wherever, people are picking up the theology that they're pushing out through the church. But James, I'm going to let you just kind of take this, because I believe you do know there is another way to read this. And so if you would just kind of share that with us and open that up, and we'll take a look at some sources while you do that, man.
Yeah, for sure. And to add, before we move on to Ray's point, for a long period of time, the church saw the Torah as no longer valid. And if you string together a few misinterpretations throughout the New Testament, of which, by the way, I think we could make an episode of each one of them and put them back in their context, nullifying them, right? If you string those things together without the background knowledge, you could make a case that maybe the Torah has been done away with. You're going to have to bury some other verses that don't say that as clearly as you would like. But there's another way of reading it when you turn it. And I think what we'll see is there are people changing today. There are people who said, oh, wait, the Torah hasn't been done away with, and we need to keep all of it. So they went from one guardrail into the other guardrail. And I think the missing piece is you have to come back to the Jewish oral tradition. You have to come back to the rabbis, like it or not. That's where this knowledge comes from, is where the metaphors, the imagery comes from. That's where the midrash, the background, comes from, especially in the book of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews is the deepest in that. So if you don't have familiarity with these, the book of Hebrews will say whatever you feel it should say, because you won't have the missing, like the skeleton key to unlock it. And of course, the outcome has been the Torah in much of Christendom has become as much on one side as a sin to pursue, and the other side is no longer valid and necessary. And we have to go back to this verse and understand, in it's a quote of Jeremiah. And in that quote, God is telling the people, he's telling them he's going to renew their covenant. It's a renewal of the covenant. It's a better version of the covenant. The Torah is not going anywhere. The Torah is going to be integrated in a way that it doesn't pass away, right? It'll be so integrated that we don't even have to teach other people, because they'll already know it. So at no point does Hebrews indicate that the entire Torah is invalid. It says it's going to be so validated that it'll just be software upgrade for us, and we will never have to worry about missing it, right? Like misstepping as much as we do today. And just to ground all of this, for those who are interested, Yeshua says not a letter of the Torah will pass away until, well, change until heaven and earth pass away. So,
And it's important. It's so important to understand
yeah,
those words as much as the words, as much as the concept that's being spoken about here in Hebrews, what you just brought up, those
yeah,
words of Jesus. He says, heaven and earth, heaven and earth. What are those words in the original? And the Torah, where is it used? What is it for? Is it for the world to come? Or is it for this current world that we live here?
yeah,
Um, the Torah, I mean, the rabbis speak about seven primordial instruments that God used in order to create the world, right?
Mm.
And within these seven primordial instruments, one of them being the Torah, because what is the Torah? I mean, the Torah was given as instruction,
yeah,
as
Mhm.
as do's, don't do's in this current world, right? Because the world to come, it's a world where the righteous gets to experience the Creator in a way that we cannot even speak about. It
right,
has something to do with the next world, right? But this current world is a world that it's like the rabbis say it's the corridor before you get into the actual banquet hall. The banquet hall being the world to come. We need to do the work that the Creator has set here with all of its difficulties, with all of its trials, with all of it, and everything is a decision, right? At every moment, whether Christians want to believe it or not, you are stuck with do it or don't do it, right?
Yeah.
There are so many laws, there's so much Torah that Christians keep and have no idea that they keep it. Though they, in their mind, they say that the Torah is done away with. What they actually mean, okay, what they actually mean subconsciously without them knowing where it comes from, because the church fathers knew where it comes from. The church fathers were fighting Judaism, the church fathers were fighting the Torah. Christians don't know what they're fighting. They just believe what's been given to them, right?
That's
With with
true.
without them knowing what Christians keep so much good deeds. The mitzvot are good deeds. They keep so much good deeds and don't and they stay away from a lot of negative things. But now if you tell a Christian you keep the Sabbath and they say, of course not, that is done away with. You keep the dietary laws, kashrut, of course not, that was done away with Jesus. It's a horrible misunderstanding and a gross ignorance that Christians today have,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
yeah,
Back then, the church fathers did it with intention, and Christians have accepted it as a byproduct of time.
yeah. It's the idea that it's been such an
Your
established
brother.
idea that it can't be wrong. But I think people are coming around. People are understanding. Oh, wait, we shot ourselves in the foot, right? The church is saying we shot ourselves in the foot very
Yeah.
early on, and some people are washing out because they realize all this time we've been misunderstood. We've misunderstood this. So let me do this. Let me make a couple points just to set us up for this discussion, because number one, Hebrews is talking to Jews and Jews who are messianic inclined. These are people who are expecting some kind of a change. That's the whole purpose of this book. It's kind of talking about a change that's coming. It assumes
Yes.
we understand this cosmology, this framework. Additionally,
Mm.
in that, it understands, and it says many times, it makes a reference to the present age and the world that is coming, the
Mhm.
present world and the world that's coming. And just to start off, when you look at Hebrews 2:5, very early on in the book of Hebrews, the author says, for he did not put the world to come about which we are speaking in charge of angels. And I have a map that I've created, and I'll put it on the website, thehiddenorchard.com, and you can look at this map that I've kind of laid out. You'll see that the world to come is in a different place than where we are now. We're not in the world to come, we're in the present age. So Hebrews 2:5 indicates that not only do they understand the world to come, they understand its place in that cosmology.
Mm.
And many such verses like this, it talks about, Hebrews 9:9, the temple offerings, which are symbolic for the present age. Now, a lot of people think that, oh, the offerings are symbolic. That's an unfortunate conclusion that does seem to be what Hebrews 9 is saying, but they do serve a purpose. They do have value in this present age, but the present age wasn't the original idea of creation. The creation was supposed to be something way more, as Ray said, glorious and amazing, but it crashed. And we'll touch on that briefly. So the idea that there's going to be a change at the end of the present age as the world transitions to the world to come, which is largely going to happen through the work of Messiah. This is Jewish tradition. This isn't New Testament, even though the New Testament is pulling from this, is a rabbinic idea. All of this is a rabbinic idea in nature. And Leviticus Rabbah 9:6 says, you have these two rabbis discussing. Rabbi Menachem of Galia says, in the time to come, the Messianic era, all sacrifices will be annulled, except the sacrifice of the thanksgiving. That will not be annulled. All prayers will be annulled, but the prayer of gratitude will not be annulled. This accords with what is written, and listen to what they quote, Jeremiah 33. Using the same quote that the author of Hebrews is using, they're talking about this expiration of the temple service as we know it today, in lieu of a much more grand, not related to sin version, because we won't have to worry about sin. Why? Because Jeremiah tells us the Torah will be on our hearts. So in the midrash, they're quoting the same prophecy, the same chapter that you see the book of Hebrews quoting, with the same conclusion that there's going to be some change in the world to come.
Can I ask you, James, a question that you could answer for us? The question is this. Because the sacrifices were given because of certain things that have happened, right? Before Adam sinned, that Cain or his son Abel, and Adam is said to be the first priest. They had not. We don't know the offerings that Adam might have made to God before the sin, but we only know of the sacrifices that Cain and Abel brought after the sin. So I would ask you, since we're talking about certain things being obsolete in the Messianic era, which is still part of this current world, if something is no longer needed, I mean, if, like you were saying, there's no more sin, right? So we're talking about something that we don't need sacrifices for sin anymore. It's not like we're annulling the commandments. It's just no longer needed. It served this purpose during this time, during this world. It's not like we were going to, I mean, the book of Hebrews makes that point. It says, it's not like we're going to continue to make sacrifices for sin over and over and over and over again. When would the world to come? When would the perfect world come? Right? It would just continue to go. People continue to sin and sacrifice and sin. That was not the purpose of how the Torah was given. But this is the way that Christianity thinks about it.
So that's Ray. That's the difference between what I think we said in other podcasts, is that time from a Hellenistic standpoint is seen as linear. There's no going back. In the Semitic worldview, it's cyclical. Everything comes back around. And when you put the Bible, all of Scripture, back into a cyclical time frame, you realize creation started with Adam. Adam broke it. There are all these methods of bringing us back to, where do we go? Back to the garden. Everything is corrected with a new fail-safe. But a lot of what happened in the meantime was, what would you call it? A rectification to get us back around to that starting point, which we already had. When you look at the world in a Hellenistic worldview, the temple is destroyed, and many Christians think there will be no more temple, and we'll go to heaven, right? And people who don't go to heaven go to hell forever. But even heaven and hell are part of this temporary, it's a stop along the cyclical time frame, but heaven and hell are passing away. Heaven passes away, and so will Gehenna, right? We understand that in the Jewish tradition, and Yeshua holds that same idea. This could be an episode on its own, but the idea that there will be an eternal hell is actually using the same word we're looking at here for age in Hebrew.
Wow.
And it was Augustine who kind of took that down the path of an eternal punishment. But if you look at it in its Greek, which is coming from the Hebrew concept, you'll see it's an age of punishment. It's the
Yeah.
present age. The present age ends and the world to come happens. So heaven and hell are part of this rectification process. And when we get back to, the garden, things will look again like they did the way Adam experienced them before the sin, before all of this happened and we fell. And that is the Jewish way of looking at it. It's a big circle.
This is the same reason. This is the same reason why Hebrews and other books of the New Testament, they liken the Messiah to the new Adam, or to the person who's able, the force of the Messiah, the process of the Messiah, even the agent of the Messiah, are the things that are able to rectify, Tikkun, make rectification for the sin of Adam, and bring the world back in order to that garden, and bring man back to that primordial state before the sin. So this is exactly why he's likened Yeshua, who's the Messiah, likened to Adam, to a rectified state of Adam.
Yeah, and that idea is also captured in the New Testament many times. Adam, the first Adam, the second Adam. And I think people are familiar with at least the phrase first Adam, second Adam. But that whole tapestry of how Messiah is, in a sense, Adam. Messiah has the same soul that Adam never achieved. And these are very, very deep concepts, which most people who are following, believing, understanding Messiah are not versed in these things to understand that it's all, I think we said this in one of our last episodes as well. I forget when. Adam had a job to elevate, right? To take us, the word tikkun has two meanings. It has to repair, but it also has like the idea of to letaken, to ornate, to perfect, right? So one is getting us out of the hole and the other is perfecting. Adam had one tikkun, which was to elevate himself and climb and subject his will to God's will. And he failed, and he fell a level, a big level, and took the whole world with him. Now
all the souls that ever existed were within Adam.
All of creation, heaven and earth, because it's all part of, as we'll talk about, the lowest world. Heaven and earth are actually part of the lowest world. So Adam had one job, now he made it two jobs. And that is now the work of the two messiahs, who really are just another version of Adam with the soul of Adam, to get us back up to where we were in the beginning. And then the final step is to do what Adam didn't do in the first place and perfect us. But it's a big circle. And when you understand that, you recognize what the rabbis recognize and what the writer of Hebrews is actually saying, that until that day comes, which we're still waiting for that, right? Heaven and earth haven't passed away. We're still waiting for that redemption. I say we break into explaining the worlds a little bit. I think we've kind of explained that there is a present age and a world to come. Maybe we take a look at those worlds and we kind of explain how we got here and what the end looks like.
Yeah, so it's very important that the listeners understand that at that passage there in Hebrews, when it's talking about, speaking of a new covenant, he makes the first one obsolete. We're talking about an actual age, an age that's coming to an end, and a new age is getting ready to come, because the new covenant, right? That new covenant, which is intermixed with the original covenant, it's just a covenant that things are beginning to be rectified, right? It's the first covenant is part of this current world, with sacrifices for sin, and and having to, ritual purity, having all these different things are part of this current world. But once we get into the world of Tikkun and the rectification happens, those old things, it's not that they become annulled as that God's commandments are. That's not what it's talking about. We're talking about two different worlds, two different things, concepts. That old concept, that
it will just fall to the wayside. It won't be needed anymore because the world, humanity will be rectified. It won't need sacrifices for sin anymore. It won't need ritual immersion for impurities anymore.
Exactly.
We won't need that. It's not that, not the 613 commandments are now annulled. That's not what that means. As we can see rabbis say in the midrashim, speaking about the sacrificial service, what begins to happen is the sacrifices that will be offered are sacrifices of thanksgiving.
Yep. Right.
This is what Hebrews is speaking about. They understood these things. They knew these things.
Absolutely.
And it's probably why many of the ancient Jewish disciples of Jesus, a lot of them began to become, check this out, vegetarians. Why? Do you have any idea why, Mitch? James, can you tell us?
Yeah, so and this is where understanding Kabbalah comes in handy. We're going back to the pre days of the creation when we ate plants. When Hashem said all the trees and the fruit of the trees are yours to eat. There was no meat in the equation.
Yep. The disciples, they believed that Yeshua would probably come back in their day. They didn't have God gives the prophecy to the Navi, to the prophet, whether it was Yeshua. Even Yeshua says, hey, of that day and that time, no one knows, not even the Son, not even the Messiah, only the Creator, one God knows the perception of that prophecy when it would be fulfilled. They believed it was going to be in their lifetime. So what did they begin to do? They began to try to make like the Garden of Eden is coming back. The Messianic era is coming back.
Exactly.
All spoke of it as if it was getting ready to happen.
Yeah. And they weren't the only ones at that time. Remember, the Qumran community also believed they didn't have kids. Partly they didn't have kids because they felt they were going to be engaged in a spiritual war any minute. And they lived in such a way, training and preparing for that, because that time period, according to the tradition, and you can see bits and pieces of it in the Talmud, that time period was ripe for some kind of messianic return. Right?
Yes.
That's part of the background, which there were a lot of messianic movements that happened at that time because
at that very time, yes,
everyone knew that this is the window when this happens, and if it doesn't happen now, we are going the long road. And in the window, in that window was the New Testament, in that window, and they thought any minute.
Rabbi Mendel Kessin, he actually says that. He says that 2,000 years ago, the Messiah should have come. He says that the rabbis understood that at that time, there was a window when the light of he actually says that the light of the Messiah came in at that time. There's another Gemara, Talmudic statement by the rabbis. They say that the world is split up into 6,000 years. The first 2,000 years is called the 2,000 years of Tohu, void, right? The next 2,000 years are the 2,000 years of Torah, meaning there was a window from which the Torah could come into our life, and it did at Mount Sinai. And then the last 2,000 years is the years of the Messiah. If you do the math, the window of the Messiah when it was supposed to open was right at the time of the first century. Incredible. And that time, that window when the Messiah is supposed to come is from that time, first century, all the way into our time. We're almost done with 2,000 years.
That's right. That's the amazing thing, that these last 2,000 years have all been moving in that direction, albeit slowly. That was our last episode. We spoke about that divine providence and how slowly but surely it was moving, but it took the long road because that window, the world wasn't ready at that time.
Yeah. So we keep that in mind. What's being obsolete here is our old current world is fading away and it's making room for the new world.
Right. And what I think is probably another point of contention between the Semitic, the Jewish worldview, and the Hellenistic worldview is that everything gets better as time goes on. In the Jewish worldview, we recognize there's a degradation of each generation.
Yes.
further we get from creation, from Adam, from Sinai, the further we get, the worse we get. So in that vernacular, I'm studying the Tanya with a group of people. We're the heel. We're the very heel of Adam, right? If you look at time, starting from Adam's head down to his feet, we're the heel. We're that dead tissue, the dense dead tissue at the bottom, but we're also at the very last bit of time before the redemption comes. Which makes you wonder, right? So if everything was better in the past, what did it look like, right? If we have 5 separate worlds today, what could it possibly have looked like? And we'll never know exactly, but what could it have looked like in Adam's time?
That's incredible question, and it's very difficult to talk about these things without allegory, without analogy, right? I think that's why we need these things, and I'm sure that's why the rabbis did it. The rabbis speak about these things, right? They talk about that primordial state of Adam that he was in, and Eve experienced too. Okay, how do you understand? Think about some of the things that we're talking about in the book of Genesis. Eve was taken out of Adam. Weird, right? How do you understand that? Or, the rabbis say that because they were naked, their garments were garments of light. We're talking about analogy. We're talking about allegory. It's not something literal. It's not like he was just like a torch or something like that. If you think about it like that, you misunderstand what is trying to be taught here. Light is spiritual. It has to do with the spiritual capacity of Adam at the moment. At that time, he was more spiritual than physicality. Now we're more physical. We don't. The light is concealed in man. We have to work with emunah to really make that part a spiritual reality for us. Okay, exactly. But it says that Adam's heel, the lowest part of his body can it can overlap all the worlds. That's how much spirituality, how much spiritual light he had just by his heel.
Right.
Very, very deep things. And getting back to what you were asking about the 5 worlds, which we will get into, tap into here a little bit. I think that they're still here, James. And the 5 worlds, they actually, even the highest level is right here, but we cannot perceive them. Okay? Because one of the first things we have to understand is, what does this term that's used in the New Testament, okay, this term that's used in English translation, world, universes, what is the original? We're talking about olamot, okay, which is roughly translated as worlds, and it's derived from the root word of elem, and elem, it's that word means to conceal.
Exactly.
Within the world, my brothers, within the world, within the 5 worlds, God, the invisible creator, who has no physicality, he is concealed in this world, and it's our job to be able to point at him. He's there, he's here, he's in everything, he's in you, he is in me. We're supposed to find the creator in all things, in his work, what he's done, right? Very quickly, just to name them off, and James can cut in here, the 5 worlds, from the top order to our world, it's like this. The highest world is called Adam Kadmon, the primordial meta world. The level, the world below that is called Atzilut, which is the world of emanation. The world below that is called the world of Berea, and that means the world of creation. And then after that is the world of Yetzia, the world of formation. And after the world of formation, that's the 4th, it's the world of Asiya, our world. It's the world of action, with all the world of action, when all the movements and everything comes into play. But within each world, the higher world is within it. And that's what I was trying to say about James's question. Were the 5 worlds connected? Are they not connected? They're all there, but we do not have, especially since there's a descending of the degradation of the generations, we can barely even We don't know anything about our own world, the world of Asiya, the world of action, much less perceive any world above that.
Exactly.
Go
Yeah,
ahead, Mike. Go ahead,
great,
brother.
great job. I mean, we'll put an image of these on the website in case somebody wants to visualize if you're a visual learner. But like Ray said, our creation, Adam could span all of those, which means Adam
Wow.
contained
Wow.
all of those. He had all of that capacity. And after his sin, humanity fell in capacity and in potential that we can no longer perceive outside of our own world very easily. Probably another episode would be there are 5 levels of the human soul.
Which are
So
connected to the 5 worlds. Yeah.
exactly, they connect to those 5 worlds because all of those are in us. But a significant number of those for most of our lives are disabled. We have to do a lot of work to
Unconscious.
turn them on and reveal that light. And the New Testament uses that language in the same metaphors and the same consistency as the rabbis do. Hence why, Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, is enabling people to what? To go higher in godliness, to become aware of God. And you climb these levels of the soul through what? Through the Torah. That's what the Torah is all about. It's about helping us climb our way back up to recover what we lost. So yeah, so when you have these levels above you and you can't get to them, how do you do it? Does God say, good luck? No, he gives us a Torah. He gives us the written Torah with its commandments and his laws and the structure that the rabbis can understand it and apply it in life. And that's how we do this. We get back up and we follow those and we watch our levels of purity. We make sure we're not doing things impure because we fall back down. And until the redemption happens, it's really our only tool to get back what we lost, to get back to those higher levels of perception, those levels of consciousness. And these are very deep concepts, but the New Testament, the rabbis and the Talmud, the Gemara, they seem to have understood these things very deeply because they speak about them using the same terminology. And we're only now in the last, 50 years, really starting to see that through these translations, that there's this affinity between them. And we're beginning to understand it more too.
Yep. I mean, that's beautiful what you said there, James. And our Christian friends, brothers and sisters, Messianics, whatever, it's very imperative that you understand how important and how beneficial are the commandments, the mitzvot. Once you understand them in this capacity, right, that the commandments themselves are connectors. How to connect to God? By keeping the commandments. Every time that you fulfill a positive commandment, you are actually connecting yourself to God. And when you stay away from something that God said stay away from and don't do, you are connecting to God. If you can understand that, it's such a beautiful thing. You'll see the beauty and how much we need these godly instructions, the commandments.
Exactly. It really changes everything. It changes the entire way you interact with the Torah when you better understand what we lost and where we need to be. And that's why, people jumping ahead to become vegetarians, there's a beauty in that. It's very challenging, but there's a beauty in that because it if you know that it's the destination, why not try to take it on now? Right? There's an elevation to that. I'm sure someone could say, I'll just deal with it when I get there. But what if you could move yourself in that direction early? Why not? Right. And that's what all of the Torah is about. It's helping us get back to or move ahead to what we lost, right? If you could consider it in a circle.
Yeah, I think that listening to you guys for a few moments there and just thinking back to some of the educational experiences and the lectures and teachings and so forth, it is, there's a lot that we assume. There's the assumption that we understand the difference between the present age and the world to come. Well, within the general, the general population of the church, they don't. They, it's almost like I used to say all the time. You could go to 10 different people and ask them, what was the gospel? What is the gospel? And you're going to get 10 different answers for the most part. And when you start talking about the depth of the writing within Hebrews, from taking it from that surface and going into the thought process of someone who understands it's not what you get in Sunday school. It's not what you get in a 2-year seminary class. A broad brush of teachings like that, and it is just absolutely eye-opening. And the days of the conversations of the tip of the iceberg are gone, because people are getting smarter. People, young people, especially young, bright people who are educated enough to have access to information like this, they begin then to think through these concepts, and then they challenge those that have always put the original, what they were teaching and so forth out there. But there's just that, I think, from the pulpit, a lot of times there's so much, not the pulpit, but there's so much assumption, that the folks that are receiving it they're either receiving it from a standpoint that's incorrect, or they begin to open it up like you guys do a lot of times and take us into the levels of understanding just the thought process, the writings, the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it just blows it out of the water. It just completely, there's so much to have to be pulled away that it just goes crazy.
I want to add again that if we were to read what's happening here in the book of Hebrews into context, everything that we've said, that you've said, Mitch, that James has said about Christianity and its linear type of thought process, as it's going this way, and anything behind that is annulled, is obsolete. Since Jesus, the Messiah, has already come, the Torah which came after that it's done away with. And so with that lens, they read these letters, and they're misunderstanding, and there's so much contradiction in many things that it's believed. Okay, that I once believed too. But read into context. You go to the first verse here in Hebrews 8, says, now the point in what we are saying is this: we have such a high priest. Who are they talking about? First of all, watch this, okay? The Torah is eternal. I mean, the Torah, as it is placed in our current world, not one jot, not one tittle will pass away with it. It will continue. It will continue, okay? Until we get into the rectified order, and then we don't know what happens there, okay? But check this out. Who's the high priest that they're talking about here? Kohen Gadol. They're talking about Yeshua. Is Yeshua from the tribe of Levi? No, he's from the tribe of Judah. So this is how Christians think. Oh, we have a greater high priest. I'm sorry. Let me tell you, it doesn't work that way. Okay. The Levitical priesthood was set forth by God as an eternal statute. They must do this work as long as our current world exists. It's not annulled. It's not against God. It's actually holy, just, and good. God commanded it so. Yep. Yeshua is not a priest in that order. He can't be. It is against, if he were to try to do a sacrifice at the temple, he would be a sinner, and we must disregard him. Hebrews is talking about Yeshua being a priest. It's a Kabbalistic concept. You only find this kind of thought process and teachings in the writings of the rabbis.
Yes.
You only find there.
Yes.
Of a heavenly priest. This is Kabbalistic. This is rabbinic. There are plenty of writings that speak about angels sacrificing souls in God's heavenly temple. Christians have never heard of these things. This is the thought process that the book of Hebrews is speaking from.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, it's one of the deepest, most Kabbalistic books next to John that you'll find.
So it's talking about, we have such a high priest, talking about the Messiah. The Messiah is not from Levi, he's from Judah, and they're likening him to Melchizedek, who is also not from the tribe of Levi. See, there's something going on here. Then it says, one who is seated at the right hand, he's not even here anymore. The Messiah has been translated into Shemaim, into the upper worlds, right? He's seated at the right hand, allegory, right hand of throne of majesty in heaven, a minister in the holy places, not here in the earthly temple in Jerusalem, okay, where the Levites have the commandment by God to offer animal sacrifices until further notice, right? A minister in the holy places, in the true tent that the Lord set up and not man, the true tent, because we are all heading in a way, not linear. We're all heading back to the primordial state that James was talking to us about. We're all heading back to that primordial rectified order of man, of Adam. Okay?
Right.
Then it says, true tent, or not set up by the Lord. Okay. For every high priest is appointed to offer gifts and sacrifices such that it is necessary. It is doing a rabbinic argumentation here. Thus, it is necessary for the priest also to have something to offer. Right. So the Levites, they offer certain gifts that God has commanded to do so. So in heaven, it is the same thing, because what we have here in our earthly world, it is a copy of the things that Moses saw, that God gave him through his perception, through his prophecy of things he saw in heaven. Very hard to define, right? That's why the angels are said in other rabbinic books to be offering souls.
Mhm.
We're not offering souls down here, but it's connected to these things, right? So then it says, now, if he were on earth, look at that. He makes it. He does it. If he were on earth, he would not be a priest at all, since there are priests who offer gifts according to the Torah.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
That's a huge statement.
We're talking about different time frames, different worlds.
But that's why I would challenge anyone that's listening at this point to go back to the passage, reread the passage, okay? Because it's not about the Torah passing away or being nullified. I mean, it's about the shift that comes at the end of the age. We don't think about that. We don't think about, first of all, you don't think about the Torah changing, but the shifting of it is something that has to be taken in. And then but we are still not there yet.
Oh, check this out.
Therefore, the Torah is still valid as ever. It's not until heaven and earth passes away. So when you're pulling that out and you're thinking about the whole idea of the shift of the Torah, even for someone as myself, who is just now understanding the validity and the weight of the Torah when it comes to what I've been taught before and how I viewed the last third of what we call the Bible. Okay. It's huge. It's huge to think that there could be a shift. James, I'll ask you to kind of close that down on those thoughts there, because it's mind-boggling. You've got to have something to grab onto to keep consistent with this thought process. Otherwise it eats you up, man, and you're just like sitting there going, this is unbelievable. But this is what Hebrews is about. I mean, this is what the passages are pulling out.
Yeah, I'll come back to that. I'll come back with a closing thought, but I wanted to hear what Ray wanted to add something here.
Yeah. So to continue to make the point of where Mitch was just going, all right, about the covenant and the world, right? Something being obsolete or something being annulled, it's still not. Let me further, right? If you go down to verse 6, it says, but as it is, Christ has obtained a ministry that is much more excellent than that of the old covenant. as he is mediated better, as he mediates is better, since it is erected on better promises. Check this out. Okay, so it still looks like, especially if you come from the Christian lens, like, one is better than the other. The old law is done away with. The old covenant, whatever. Again, we're talking about cyclical here. Okay, for if the first covenant had been faultless, there would be no occasion to look for a second. This is a true statement, but how you look at it is what is crucial. Okay, why? We just talked about this, Mitch. We just talked about this, James, for over 40 minutes now. If it was perfect, the way that God gave the commandments, and not the commandments, the sacrificial system, what we're talking about here, about you sin, and you got to go offer a sin sacrifice, and you need to purify yourself from impurity and etc. What are we going to do this for eternity? No. Within the Torah, within the same covenant that God gave Israel, is the rectified order as well. Where is it found? The Christians love to talk about this. That's why it's talking about a new covenant, which Messiah mediates, which is better, right? And it says, and speaking of a new covenant, he makes the first one obsolete, and what is becoming obsolete is growing old, is ready to vanish away. The world order, not the Torah. Okay, now check this out. What is the new covenant? Let me read it to you. Here's the new covenant. It's in Jeremiah 31, chapter 31, verse 31. Listen carefully, please. Listen to the new covenant, which the Christians speak about, which is supposedly the one that the Messiah takes hold of and brings us into, which is, by the way, still not quite here yet. Okay, but check this out. Jeremiah says in verse 31, "Behold, the days are coming, declares Hashem, when I will make a new covenant with who? Check this out. With the house of Israel and the house of Judah," meaning all the 12 tribes. "Not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand," talking about in Egypt, "and brought them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant that they broke." The Bible is the only book that talks about its heroes and their sins. It's the only book that does this. If you wanted to do a fable, you wouldn't talk about all your errors and all your sins. It's all there. Right? It says, not like it says, when I brought them out of Egypt, my covenant that they broke, though I was a husband, declares Hashem. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares Hashem. I will put my Torah within them, and I will write it on their hearts. And this is what everyone tries to do. All the rabbis in Yeshua, they try to make this happen while we're still in this current order. They will fight with it, and they will nullify themselves, their ego, and mesirut nefesh, sacrificial service to God, and wanting to serve him with all their heart, with all their might, with all their soul, like Yeshua says. They're trying to get that Torah written on their hearts and on their minds. This is what the Shema is all about. When you pray the Shema, right? And it says, "And I will be their God, and they shall be my people." The same Jewish people. And they will know, and no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, "Know Hashem, for they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares Hashem. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more." Right? Okay, that is the new covenant that Christians talk about. If it's not made with the Jews with the same Torah, then it's definitely not made with no Gentile. We need to understand that. Okay? That Jesus, he's Jewish. Okay? Before he's a Messiah to anyone, he needs to make sense and needs to be within his own framework, mindset, outlook, religion. So what we're talking about here is the same covenant. Certain things of the current order that will no longer be needed, because we will enter into the rectified order. That's what Hebrews is talking about. That's why if you stop thinking about Yeshua for a moment, you think about the job of the Messiah is to be the agent of redemption of the world of Tikkun, of rectification, the rectified order.
Yeah.
This is what we're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, and what to add to that, if God is in the business of breaking covenants, then everybody's in big trouble, right? But when you fast forward to just to cap what you were saying, when you fast forward to Hebrews 11:3, it again tells us by faith, by emunah, we understand that the worlds were set in order at God's command. The visible has its origin in the invisible, meaning the
Yes.
invisible, the higher level worlds, came before the physical world that we're in. So it's not as if the new covenant is a better version and we leave the old one in the past. It's a retraction as things collapse back upwards into that structure they were within in the
Wow.
beginning.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's like a in physics, it would be like a hypercube.
Yep.
Instead, it's now stretched and pulled apart so that the spiritual and the physical are separated. But when it
Mhm.
snaps back in, everything collapses back up into its origin, which Hebrews says is in the invisible. It's the above, it's the temple above. Then we're not really doing anything new. It's a renewal. And Brit Chadash is new covenant, but that word doesn't always mean new. It usually means renewed, like the moon.
New.
Rosh Chodesh is it's not a brand new moon. It's a renewed moon. It's the moon coming back around. So
Hmm.
everywhere you see that word, most of the time it's referring to a renewal. And that's all the new covenant is. It's a renewal where, as we saw in the very beginning, even the rabbis said this because it's a rabbinic idea. We're going back to what we had in the beginning, but a better version of it. How?
Yes.
Because we can't break it the same way it was broken the first time.
Wow.
And just my final word on this is, I think if people see this, number one, I would like to know, are there any listeners who would like to do a study on this book? Because I think this book would be an amazing opportunity to kind of do a live session
Wow.
and answer questions. So let us know in the comments. And two,
That would be amazing.
right?
Yes.
And I think the last thing I'll say, if you consider what we just said tonight, time is no longer linear, it's cyclical, we're going back. We can actually bring some of that down now in our lives and live that out and elevate ourselves. That changes everything. It changes the way you interact with the Jewish people. It changes the way you pray, because now you understand prayer is a consciousness multiplier. So your prayer should change. The way you treat other people should change. The way you
Yep.
live. Everything now has a new dimension to it. It's deeper.
Hmm.
And guess what? The Torah is your tool, your toolbox to get back to that higher level dimension.
Beautiful. Baruch Hashem.
Yes. Wow. It's incredible. A lot to think about, a lot to
Digest.
watch again. Yes. But I know, James, you put a lot of work into structuring this out for us, and Ray, you do a whole awful lot of research as well, and so appreciate bringing discussions like this to the table where we can get them out there and get people starting to think and beginning to go back and reread the pieces that they've read over and over again and seeing them in new light and in truthful light. And so I can't thank you guys both again for just another thoughtful and just thought-provoking episode to think about, as I know when I sit back down quietly and go back through these verses and start thinking about the different elevations and the different levels of what goes into them, it's just incredible. So again, incredible. Please send us some comments. Let us know what you're thinking. I think James had a great idea about the possibility of doing a study of this book. If you've got any ideas that you would like to see us unfold in this realm, please add them to the comment sections. I also want to thank those of you that do put positive comments in and let us know that you do appreciate it. Guys, great job.
Mhm.
I really enjoyed this. And sometimes, I can get carried away, but it's just there's a whole lot to say, and you get really excited about it.
I sit here and I'm just like, pop, keep going, Ray, pop.
Well, I like Ray's
No, no,
intensity. Raise it. You could almost graph Ray's intensity as the show goes on.
Like, do I say anything or do I just shut it down? All right.
That's great.
Great job. Listen, everybody, take care of yourselves, and blessings to you and blessings to your families. And again, we appreciate any feedback on these episodes, and just keep them coming. And guys, blessings to you guys as well. Take care of yourselves and your families, and we'll see you on another episode of Rethinking Faith.